The classroom was almost silent that evening, the kind of silence that feels heavier after the laughter students has faded. Desks sat in neat rows, shadows stretching across the floor as the sun slipped lower outside the tall windows. Only the soft scratch of her pen broke the stillness. She was perched on the edge of her desk, papers balanced in her lap, her brow furrowed in concentration. I had told myself I'd leave after helping organize the last stack of assignments, but something in me kept stalling. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was the way the lamplight softened the sharp lines of her face, but I didn't want the moment to end. She didn't notice me at first, or at least she pretended not to. I caught myself studying the way a strand of hair had slipped loose from her bun, brushing against her cheek whenever she tilted her head. It was such a small detail, but it made her seem less like the untouchable teacher I once knew, and more like a woman sitting in the same lonely quiet as me. I gathered the stack of papers in front of me, sliding one across her desk. My fingers brushed closer to hers than necessary, just for a second, enough to feel the faint warmth of her skin, though she didn't look up. But I saw the pause in her pen, the almost imperceptible hesitation. I should have pulled my hand back immediately. Instead, I left it there, inches from hers, as if waiting for something neither of us dared to name. My pulse picked up, and suddenly I was aware of every sound. The tick of the clock on the wall, the muffled hum of traffic outside, even the faint rustle of her sleeve as she adjusted her posture. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I thought she might scold me for lingering, remind me of boundaries I already knew too well. But she didn't. She only held my gaze, and in that quiet look was something I couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, hesitation, maybe even a hint of the same spark flickering inside me. I forced myself to smile, light and casual, as though my heart wasn't thundering against my ribs. "Do you ever get tired of this?" I asked, gesturing at the endless stack of papers. Her lips curved, not quite into a smile, but close. "Every day," she said softly. The words weren't remarkable, but the way she said them, so honest, so unguarded, shifted something between us. For the first time, I wasn't just her former student helping after hours. I was a man sitting across from her in the quiet, sharing a sliver of truth she rarely allowed herself to voice. The spark wasn't a grand gesture, not a dramatic confession. It was smaller than that, an accidental brush of skin, a stolen glance, a shared silence that carried more weight than words. But even then, I knew it was the beginning of something neither of us would be able to ignore for long. The evening stretched on longer than either of us expected. I should have gone home hours ago, but when she asked if I could help her sort through the shelves of old books, I found myself saying yes without hesitation. There was something about the way she asked. Not an order, not even a request, but almost as if she didn't want to be left alone in that quiet classroom. The shelves smelled of old paper and ink, the kind of scent that clings to your hands after handling books too long. I reached for the higher stacks while she sorted through the lower rows. Occasionally our arms brushed as we crossed paths, neither of us pulling away too quickly. Each touch was fleeting, but it left behind a subtle heat that lingered longer than it should have. She laughed suddenly at a memory the books triggered, her voice echoing warmly in the empty room. "I used to read this one to my class every year." Half of them pretended to be bored, but the other half, you could see their eyes light up. Her laugh softened her in a way I wasn't used to seeing. She wasn't the composed, strict figure I remembered from years ago. Here, in the quiet after hours, she seemed more human, less guarded, more herself. I found myself watching the curve of her lips as she smiled, the faint crinkle at the corner of her eyes when she remembered something fondly. "You always had a way of making things interesting," I said before I could stop myself. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly as if trying to decide whether my word were meant as simple observation or something deeper. "That's kind of you," she replied. her voice softer now. I passed her another book, and this time our fingers brushed. Not by accident, not completely. The spark was sharper, more deliberate than before. I felt the warmth of her skin for a heartbeat before she pulled away. But she didn't pull away quickly. Her gaze flickered to mine and held longer than it should have. It was the kind of glance that said everything words couldn't: hesitation, awareness, and something she was trying hard to suppress. My chest tightened, caught between the thrill of connection and the weight of restraint. We didn't speak of it. Instead, she asked about my family, my work, little things that let the conversation drift further from formality. I told her stories, light ones that made her laugh again. Each time she laughed, I felt the walls she'd built around herself soften just a little more. But beneath it all, the tension remained. The closeness, the near touches, the shared silence between words. It all built an invisible line neither of us crossed, yet neither of us could ignore. By the time we finished stacking the last of the books, the classroom felt different. Not just a place of learning, not just a room of desks and chalkboards, but a space that held something unspoken between us. And though we walked out side by side, neither of us mentioning the brush of fingers or the lingering glances, I knew we were both thinking the same thing. Lines can be drawn on paper, but the heart rarely follows them. It was later than usual when I realized neither of us was making any move to leave. The classroom was dim, lit only by the small desk lamp she had pulled closer, its golden glow circling us in a kind of quiet cocoon. The rest of the world faded into shadow. She was sitting at her desk now, her chair angled slightly toward me. I had taken the seat beside her, far too close for what was appropriate, but neither of us acknowledged it. I leaned forward with an elbow resting on the desk, trying to act casual even as my heart beat faster with every inch that separated us, or rather, didn't separate us. I found myself watching her, not in the way you'd watch a teacher, but in the way a man studies the woman in front of him. The way the lamplight brushed her cheekbones, the way her lashes lowered when she was lost in thought, the curve of her hand as it rested lightly against the desk. "You work too hard," I said quietly. Her lips curved faintly, though she didn't look at me right away. "That's what teachers do." "Not all of them," I countered. "Some just go through the motions." You care. Maybe too much." That made her finally glance at me, her eyes searching mine. It was a mistake, I think, because once her gaze met mine, neither of us looked away. The silence stretched, heavy, full of things neither of us dared to name. I don't know what possessed me then. Maybe the quiet, maybe the way her presence seemed to pull me closer, but I let my knee brush against hers under the desk. Just lightly, almost as if it could be passed off as an accident. But I didn't move it away. Her breath caught. It was subtle, but I noticed. For a moment she froze, then she drew in a slow breath, her voice dropping lower, softer. "This is against the rules." The words landed between us like a stone in still water. They rippled through me, a reminder of the lines we weren't supposed to cross. Yet the way she said it, it wasn't cold, it wasn't final. It was more like a confession, an admission that she felt the very same pull I did. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I simply sat there, the weight of her words pressing against the heat of my desire to reach for her hand. Her eyes lingered on me a second longer before she looked away, closing the distance by retreating into herself. Still, she didn't move her knee from mine. She left it there, steady, pressed lightly against me, as though some part of her didn't want to let go. The clock ticked quietly on the wall. The hum of the lamp filled the silence. And yet, all I could hear was the unspoken truth hanging in the air. Rules existed for a reason, but so did the feelings we were both trying so hard to ignore. And for the first time, I knew, sooner or later, one of us would break. By the time we finally gathered our things, the hallway lights outside the classroom had already dimmed to their night setting. The building felt deserted, the kind of silence that settles after everyone else has gone home. She locked the classroom door, and we walked together toward the parking lot, our footsteps echoing faintly in the empty corridor. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain that had been threatening all afternoon. A low rumble of thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, and by the time we stepped into the lot, drops were already beginning to fall. She stopped just short of her car, fumbling with her bag. I watched as she pulled out a folded umbrella, her fingers brushing over the worn handle. She hesitated, glancing at me with the same measured caution she always wore when she wasn't sure how close was too close. "You should hurry," she said softly, "before it gets heavier." But I didn't move. Instead, I reached gently for the umbrella in her hands. "Let me." Her brows lifted just slightly, but she didn't resist as I took it from her. I snapped it open, holding it above us both. The circle of fabric wasn't large, forcing us nearer. She stepped closer without protest, the space between our shoulders vanishing until we brushed with every step. The rain began to fall in earnest, soft and steady, drumming lightly against the umbrella above us. The world blurred around the edges, car lights smeared with rain, the pavement shining slick beneath our feet. But inside that small shelter, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just her and me. I could feel her warmth radiating through the thin space between us, the occasional brush of her arm against mine with each step. She didn't pull away. If anything, I thought I saw her lean the tiniest bit closer, as if testing how far she dared to go. We walked slowly, neither of us in any rush to reach her car. The silence between us wasn't awkward this time. It was charged, full of unspoken things. Finally, she broke it. Her voice was quieter than the rain, but I heard it as clearly as if she'd whispered direct, the kind of rebellion too small to name, but too important to ignore. I held the umbrella steady, the rain falling all around us, and for the first time I saw her not as my teacher, not as someone bound by rules, but as a woman walking beside me under the night sky, caught in the same storm I was. And I knew, whatever line we had been pretending to keep, we had just stepped across it. The storm passed quickly, leaving the world washed clean. By the time I returned to her office a few evenings later, the air carried that faint, damp freshness of rain-soaked earth. The windows were slightly open, letting in the cool night breeze that rustled the papers on her desk. The room felt different tonight, not just quiet, but intimate, as though it had been waiting for us. She was already there when I arrived, sitting behind her desk, her arms crossed loosely as though she were holding herself together. Her eyes softened when she saw me, but I caught the shadow in them too, the weight of something she had been carrying silently. I closed the door gently behind me and leaned against the frame, waiting for her to speak. She looked down at her hands instead, twisting the silver ring she wore on her right hand. "I shouldn't," she began, her voice so low I almost didn't catch it. She stopped, exhaled, and tried again. "I shouldn't let this go on. I know where it could lead." Her words weren't sharp, but heavy, as though she was admitting them more to herself than to me. I stepped closer, slow, careful, giving her every chance to stop me if she wanted. "Are you afraid of me?" I asked softly. Her head lifted quickly, eyes locking onto mine with something almost like surprise. "No," she whispered. "Not you. I'm afraid of everything else. What people would say, what would cost. I built my life on following rules, and now," she cut herself off, pressing her lips together. Her vulnerability undid me. For years, she had been the picture of composure, the teacher who never faltered, the woman who always carried herself with calm authority. Seeing her like this, uncertain, exposed, made me ache to reach across the distance between us. I moved closer still until I was standing at the edge of her desk. I lowered my voice. "Then let me carry some of that fear with you." Her eyes searched mine as if trying to decide whether I meant it, whether I could possibly understand. But something in her gaze softened, a fragile trust, a flicker of relief, as though the weight she bore wasn't entirely hers anymore. Slowly, hesitantly, I lifted my hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face. My fingertips grazed her temple, then slid gently along the curve of her ear. Her skin was warm beneath my touch. She closed her eyes just for a heartbeat, leaning ever so slightly into the contact. The silence deepened, rich and full. I felt her breath catch, felt the subtle tremor in her composure. When she opened her eyes again, there was something different in them. No longer just fear, but also longing. She didn't say another word. She didn't have to. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. She was tired of fighting the current pulling us together. And though we hadn't yet spoken the words aloud, something had shifted irreversibly. We were no longer circling the line. We had already crossed it in the quiet shadows of that room. The night was heavier than usual, the kind that pressed against the windows and wrapped the classroom in a hush. The lamplight cast a soft glow across her desk, illuminating only a small circle where the two of us sat, side by side, as though the rest of the world had been swallowed in shadow. I could sense her unease even before she spoke. Her posture was straight, her hands folded too neatly in her lap, as if she were bracing herself for something inevitable. The faint tremor in her breathing gave her away, though she tried to mask it. For a long while, neither of us spoke. I traced idle patterns on the edge of the desk, trying to keep my heart steady. Then, in a voice that carried both resolve and weariness, she whispered it again. Those words she had clung to since the beginning. This is against the rules. Her eyes didn't meet mine when she said it. They lingered instead on the stack of papers before her, as though she hoped they might anchor her to reason. But her voice betrayed her. It wasn't stern this time. It wasn't a warning. It was almost pleading. I let the silence hang for a beat before I answered, my tone steady, low, and certain. Then let's break them together. Her head turned sharply, her eyes wide, searching. The flicker of fear was there, yes, but underneath it, unmistakably, was relief. As if she had been waiting all this time for someone to give her permission to stop pretending. She didn't reply, not with words. Instead, her hand shifted on the desk, so small a movement I almost thought I imagined it. But then it came closer, inch by inch, until her fingers brushed against mine. I turned my hand over, slowly, deliberately, letting her decide if she wanted to retreat. She didn't. Her palms slid into mine, her fingers lacing with mine in a trembling surrender. The rush of warmth that surged through me was immediate, overwhelming. My thumb traced gentle circles over the back of her hand, grounding her, steadying me. She inhaled sharply, as though that small gesture alone had undone her. Her lips parted, caught between a half-smile and a confession she didn't yet dare to voice. I could see the battle in her eyes, the rules, the risks, the years of caution warring against the raw truth of what she wanted in this moment. I leaned in slightly, not enough to close the distance, just enough to make the air between us thrum with electricity. You don't have to keep fighting it, I murmured. She closed her eyes briefly, her grip tightening on my hand. When she opened them again, something in her had shifted. The fear was still there, but it no longer held her prisoner. For the first time, she didn't look like she was about to pull away. She looked like she was ready to step forward. And as her head tilted the smallest fraction toward me, I knew the line we had been circling for so long had finally broken, shattered, not with defiance, but with quiet, undeniable need. The days that followed were quieter, but not in the same way as before. Something had shifted between us, something we no longer tried to ignore. The air didn't hum with only unspoken tension anymore. It carried a softer weight, a mutual understanding, a quiet promise that we had chosen each other, no matter what the rules said. It was her idea to meet outside the classroom, somewhere no one will think to look, she had murmured, her voice trembling as if even suggesting it was a risk. I didn't argue. I only nodded, because I knew what it had cost her to even let those words leave her lips. And so, on a dusky evening, we found ourselves walking through the park. The sun was sinking low, spilling gold across the trees, turning the world into a painting. The path was nearly empty, the day giving way to night, and for the first time, she wasn't my teacher and I wasn't her former student. We were simply two people who had stumbled into something bigger than either of us had planned. We walked slowly, letting the gravel crunch beneath our feet, shoulders brushing every so often. At first, we didn't speak. There was no need to. The silence was different now. It wasn't holding us back. It was carrying us forward. When we reached a wooden bench beneath an old oak, she stopped. Without a word, she sat, smoothing the hem of her skirt with a hand that trembled just slightly. I joined her, close enough that our knees touched, though I didn't push for more. I wanted her to set the pace, to decide how far we went. For a long moment, she stared out at the fading light, her profile softened by the sunset. Then, slowly, she leaned sideways, her shoulder brushing mine, her head tilting until it rested against me. The movement was so gentle, so careful, as though she were still afraid the moment might vanish if she pressed too hard. I exhaled a long, steady breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My arms slipped naturally around her shoulders, drawing her closer. She didn't resist. Instead, she nestled into me, her cheek pressing lightly against my chest. The world narrowed to the rhythm of our breathing, the warmth of her body against mine, the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat syncing with my own. I lowered my chin, letting it rest lightly against her hair, inhaling the faint, familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the evening air. "This feels," she began, then stopped, as though the words were too fragile to finish. "Right?" I whispered for her. She didn't answer, but I felt her hand slip into mine, her fingers curling in with certainty this time. No trembling, no hesitation, just quiet acceptance. The park lights flickered on as the last of the sunlight disappeared, but neither of us moved. We didn't need to. We had already crossed the line together, and now, sitting on that bench with her hand in mine, I knew we had found something worth breaking the rules for. It wasn't rebellion anymore. It was simply us, choosing each other quietly, completely.